The sky is supposed to be the safest place on Earth. We have radar, GPS, and constant surveillance. Yet, somehow, massive machines still vanish. Today, we're covering the 10 most mysterious aviation disappearances that logic can't explain. From stolen jets to planes swallowed by the ice, these stories will make you rethink your next flight. If you love dark, unexplained mysteries, please hit subscribe. It really supports the channel. Now, let's begin. It's May 25th, 2003. The sun is starting to sink over the Atlantic, and the air at 4 de Fevereiro International Airport is thick, humid, heavy, smelling of jet fuel and dust. Luanda, Angola, a city that's only recently stopped tearing itself apart after decades of civil war. The airport is chaos in slow motion. Soviet-era cargo planes sit grounded, rusting in the heat. Western jets gather fees they'll never pay, and sitting among them, like a metallic corpse, is a Boeing 727. Registration N844AA. It's been there for 14 months, unpainted, raw aluminum gleaming dull silver in the fading light. No passengers, no crew, just a machine in purgatory, racking up over $4 million in airport fees that will never be paid. But here's the thing about ghosts. Sometimes they move. The plane wasn't always a ghost. 28 years earlier, it rolled off the assembly line as a proud member of the American Airlines fleet. Domestic routes, business travelers, families on vacation. But by 2003, it had been gutted. The seats were gone. In their place, 10 massive 500-gallon diesel fuel tanks. It was a flying tanker now, ferrying fuel to diamond mines in the African interior. A workhorse, a utility machine stripped of comfort and converted into something that, in the wrong hands, could be a weapon. This is 2003. Less than 2 years after September 11th, the world is paranoid. Aviation security is supposed to be airtight. The idea of a fuel-laden commercial airliner being accessible is terrifying. And yet, here it is, sitting on a tarmac in Angola, effectively abandoned. 2 men are on board that afternoon. Ben Charles Padilla, American, 54 years old, from Florida. He's a certified flight engineer and a licensed aircraft mechanic, an expert on the Boeing 727 systems. He knows the hydraulics, the fuel flow, the electrical buses. But there's a gap in his resume. He's not a certified 727 captain. He holds a private pilot's license, the kind that lets you fly a little Cessna on a clear Sunday morning. Not a 200,000-pound tri-jet airliner. The second man is John Michael Mutantu, a mechanic from the Republic of Congo. He's the helper, the assistant. He is not a pilot. They were sent here by the plane's owner, Maury Joseph of Aerospace Sales and Leasing in Florida, to get the plane flight ready and bring it home. A repossession mission. The plane had been leased to a South African entrepreneur who couldn't pay. It was stuck in legal and financial limbo, bleeding money and fees. Padilla's job was to fix it, start it, and fly it out. But that's not what happened. Around 5 in the afternoon, witnesses see the 2 men board the aircraft. The engines start. Not unusual. They're supposed to be doing an engine test, but then the plane starts moving. No radio call, no clearance. The massive jet begins taxiing across the tarmac, weaving, maneuvering. It's erratic, like someone learning to drive a car for the first time, except this car is 153 feet long with a 108-foot wingspan. The control tower notices. They try to make contact. No response. The plane continues. It rolls onto the active runway without permission. The tower controllers are shouting into their radios now. N844AA, respond. N844AA, you are not cleared for takeoff. Silence, and then the engines roar. The Boeing 727 accelerates down the runway. The navigation lights are off. The transponder, the electronic signal that tells air traffic control who you are and where you are, is disabled. Someone made the deliberate choice to turn it off. At 5:05 p.m., the jet lifts into the air. It banks southwest, not north toward Europe, not east toward the Middle East, southwest, over the Atlantic Ocean, into the empty, unmonitored vastness of the South Atlantic. The control tower watches it disappear from their radar screens. And that's it. The plane is gone. Now, this is where it gets strange. Let's start with the skill problem. A Boeing 727 is not a forgiving machine. It was designed in an era when cockpits needed 3 people, a captain to fly, a first officer to assist and communicate, and a flight engineer to manage the complex systems. There are dozens of switches, levers, and gauges. During takeoff, you're managing thrust, pitch, yaw, flaps, gear retraction, and system monitoring, all simultaneously. Ben Padilla was a mechanic. He could fix a 727. He understood how it worked. But understanding how an engine works is not the same as flying a plane. His private license qualified him to operate single-engine aircraft under visual flight rules. This is like saying someone who can change the oil in a Formula One car is qualified to race it. So how did he do it? Some have speculated there was a third person on board, an actual pilot who was never identified. But no one saw a third person board. The manifest listed 2. If there was a ghost pilot, they were invisible. Or maybe Padilla was just that desperate, or arrogant, or both. But here's the bigger question. Where did it go? This is 2003. The world is watching the skies. The United States intelligence community, CIA, FBI, Department of Homeland Security, immediately classified this as a Tier 1 alert. The fear was obvious, a massive aircraft loaded with thousands of gallons of flammable liquid in the hands of unknown actors 2 years after 9/11. This wasn't just a theft, this was a potential flying bomb. Satellites were tasked. Naval assets were scrambled. Intelligence networks across Africa were activated, and they found nothing. Think about that. A 100-ton metal tube, 153 feet long, with a wingspan wider than most houses, just vanishes. It didn't crash on land. If it had, someone would have seen smoke, wreckage, a burn scar on the earth. It didn't crash near the coast. Debris would have washed up. Oil slicks would have formed. The ocean swallowed it. Maybe. The South Atlantic is deep and vast. But modern aircraft don't just disappear over water without leaving something. Seat cushions float, life rafts deploy, fuel creates slicks that linger for days. There was nothing. Let's talk about the theories, because none of them make sense. Theory 1. The botched escape. Padilla, under pressure, decides to fly the plane out of Angola to avoid the legal mess and the mounting fees. He takes off at sunset, hoping darkness will cover his escape. But he's in over his head. A lone pilot trying to manage a heavy jet at night over open ocean. He gets disoriented. The plane crashes into the Atlantic shortly after takeoff. The impact is so violent, the wreckage sinks immediately. But here's the problem. Even a catastrophic crash leaves debris. And why turn off the transponder and lights if you're just trying to escape? That's not panic. That's premeditation. Theory 2. Insurance fraud. The plane's owner, Maury Joseph, has a history. He was charged by the SEC in the 1990s for financial fraud. The plane is a financial black hole, $4 million in debt and climbing. If it disappears, the insurance pays out. Problem solved. Joseph passed a polygraph. No evidence of a payout has ever surfaced. And if this was staged, where's the plane? You can't just hide a 727. Theory 3. Organized crime. A criminal syndicate in Central Africa needs a cargo plane. They hire or coerce Padilla to fly it to a remote airstrip in the Congo or Burundi. Once there, the plane is repainted, re-registered, and used for smuggling. Diamonds, weapons, drugs. This theory has legs. There were reports, unconfirmed, of a 727 being spotted in Conakry, Guinea, weeks later with a new paint job and registration. But the U.S. State Department dismissed the sighting. If the plane was found and the matter was settled quietly, we'll never know. Theory 4. Interdiction. The darkest theory. The plane is detected by U.S. or regional military forces. It's heading toward a population center or a strategic target, non-responsive, fuel-laden. The order is given, a fighter is scrambled, the 727 is shot down over the ocean. The incident is classified, the evidence is buried, no confirmation, no denial, just silence. So where does that leave us? It's been over 20 years. Ben Padilla's family is still waiting for answers. His sister has said publicly that he would never have endangered himself or others recklessly. He was a professional, a family man, not a terrorist, not a thrill seeker, and yet he's gone. John Mutantu, gone, and the plane, N854AA, the largest aircraft in history to disappear without a trace, is gone too. No wreckage, no bodies, no closure. Just a Boeing 727 that took off into the African sunset and flew off the edge of the world. And somewhere out there, in the deep water or the deep jungle or the deep silence of a classified file, it's still waiting to be found. June 23, 1950. Midnight, Lake Michigan. Picture this. You're flying at 3,500 feet in a 4-engine propeller plane. Outside your window, there's nothing but darkness and water stretching to the horizon. Lightning flashes in the distance, illuminating massive thunderheads stacked like mountains in the sky. The plane is shaking, not gently, violently. The kind of turbulence that makes your stomach drop and your hands grip the armrests. You're not over the ocean. You're over Lake Michigan. And that should feel safer, right? It's a lake. Land is never more than 60 miles away in any direction. But here's the thing about Lake Michigan. Sailors don't call it a lake. They call it an inland ocean. It's 307 miles long, 118 miles wide, and in places over 900 feet deep. It has shipwrecks dating back centuries. It generates its own weather systems. It has rogue waves that can flip a freighter. And on this night, it's about to claim something much bigger than a ship. Northwest Orient Flight 2501, a Douglas DC-4, 55 passengers, 3 crew members. None of them will ever be seen again. Let's set the scene properly, because the atmosphere matters. It's 1950. The Douglas DC-4 is the workhorse of American aviation. It's big, sturdy, reliable, 4 massive Pratt & Whitney engines, unpressurized cabin, capable of carrying 44 to 86 passengers depending on configuration. This particular flight is packed. Families heading west, businessmen, a few children. The plane took off from LaGuardia Airport in New York at 7:31 p.m., bound for Seattle with a scheduled fuel stop in Minneapolis. Captain Robert Lind is at the controls, 55 years old, over 17,000 hours of flight time. He's not a cowboy. He's careful, methodical, exactly the kind of pilot you want when the weather turns bad. And the weather that night? It's a monster. A squall line, a wall of severe thunderstorms is moving across the Great Lakes region. These aren't gentle summer showers. This is a rolling fortress of lightning, wind shear, and microbursts. The kind of weather that modern jets climb above at 35,000 feet, but the DC-4 can't do that. It's unpressurized. It has to stay low. It has to fly through the storm. By 11:51 p.m., Flight 2501 is over Battle Creek, Michigan. Captain Lind radios his position, 3,500 feet on course. 13 minutes later, he makes contact again. This time, there's tension in his voice. We're experiencing severe electrical storms, requesting descent to 2,500 feet. He wants to drop lower, to get under the worst of the turbulence, find smoother air, make the flight more comfortable for his terrified passengers. Air traffic control responds, "Request denied, traffic conflict." There are other planes in the area. They can't let him descend. 12 minutes later, at 12:13 a.m., Captain Lind checks in again, his last transmission, his position, somewhere over Lake Michigan near Benton Harbor. And then, nothing. No distress call, no mayday, no frantic radio chatter about losing an engine or a wing. Just silence. The plane vanished from radar. Gone. As if it had flown through a door into another dimension. Now, this is where it gets strange. When a commercial airliner crashes, especially over water, you expect a debris field, seat cushions, luggage, life jackets, oil slicks. And in the hours and days after Flight 2501 disappeared, searchers did find debris. They found floating blankets. They found pieces of the fuselage, small fragments twisted and shredded. They found an oil slick. And they found pieces of people. Let me be very clear about this, because this is where the story becomes a nightmare. They did not find bodies. They found remains, shredded, disintegrated, so traumatized by the impact that they could not be identified. The Coast Guard report used the word fragmentary. Families were told their loved ones had been recovered, But they were never told the truth, that what was recovered couldn't be buried in individual graves. So here's what happened. The remains were collected and buried in secret. Unmarked mass graves in St. Joseph and South Haven, Michigan. No headstones, no markers, no notifications to the families. It took nearly 60 years for researcher Valerie Van Heest to uncover this. She found the burial sites. She fought to have memorials installed. The families finally learned where their loved ones were. But here's the thing that doesn't make sense. If they found floating debris on the surface, why haven't they found the plane? Let's talk about the logic gap, because this is a lake, not an ocean. The Pacific Ocean is vast, deep, and largely unmapped. If a plane goes down in the middle of the Pacific, I understand why you might never find it. But Lake Michigan? We've mapped the bottom multiple times, with sonar, with magnetometers, with side-scan imaging. Modern technology can locate a soda can on the lake bed. A Douglas DC-4 is 93 feet long. It has 4 enormous radial engines, each one weighing thousands of pounds. The wings are metal, the fuselage is aluminum. There are landing gear assemblies, hydraulic systems, the tail section. We're talking about tens of thousands of pounds of wreckage. And yet, in over 70 years of searching, no one has found it. Valerie Van Heest and the Michigan Shipwreck Research Association have conducted multiple expeditions. They've used cutting-edge sonar. They've followed the debris pattern. They've narrowed the search area to a specific zone off the coast of Benton Harbor. Nothing. How does a plane this big simply disappear? Let's look at the theories, because the official explanation doesn't quite hold up. Theory 1. The microburst. Modern meteorologists believe the plane flew into a microburst, a violent downdraft within a thunderstorm. Think of it as a column of air slamming downward at speeds exceeding 100 miles per hour. If you're flying at 3,500 feet and you hit one of these, you're in trouble. The downdraft pushes you toward the water. You apply full power to climb, but the wind is stronger than your engines. The plane impacts the lake at high velocity. At that speed, water doesn't compress, it acts like concrete. The fuselage shatters on impact, the wings rip off, the engines separate, everything disintegrates. This explains the shredded debris. It explains why there were no intact bodies. But it doesn't explain why the wreckage hasn't been found. Even if the plane broke apart, the heavy components, the engines, the wing spars, should have sunk in a relatively concentrated area. Sonar should have found them by now. Theory 2. The inverted roll. An expert from Douglas Aircraft proposed a different scenario. He believed the plane was flipped upside down by severe turbulence. In an inverted attitude, the wings generate negative lift. They pull the plane down toward the earth instead of up. At 3,500 feet, Captain Lind would have had maybe 30 seconds to recover. Roll the plane upright, regain control. But if he was disoriented, if his instruments were malfunctioning due to the electrical storm, he might not have realized the plane was inverted until it was too late. This theory aligns with the forensic evidence. Investigators found a small plywood bracket that had been ripped from an oxygen bottle. The damage pattern suggested the force came from forward, downward, and to the left, consistent with a diving left turn, a graveyard spiral. But again, where's the plane? Theory 3. Mid-air explosion. Witnesses on the shore reported seeing a queer flash of light over the lake at the time of the disappearance. Some investigators believed lightning struck the fuel tanks, causing an explosion. Here's the problem. If the plane exploded in mid-air, the debris field would be massive. Pieces would scatter over miles. And yet, the debris that was found was relatively concentrated. No scorch marks were reported, no evidence of fire. The flash of light could have been lightning. Or it could have been the plane's landing lights spinning through the clouds as it tumbled out of control. But here's where the logic ends and the legend begins. For decades, sailors on Lake Michigan have reported seeing something strange near Benton Harbor, a commercial airliner flying low over the water, silent, no engine noise, just a dark shape moving through the mist. And then it vanishes. Some see it descend into the waves and disappear. Others watch it fade into the fog. It's always in the same area. always near the suspected crash site. Is it a ghost? A mass hallucination? Or is it something stranger? A residual haunting? A psychic echo of the tragedy replaying itself on the anniversary of the crash? I'm not going to tell you it's ghosts, but I will tell you this. The phenomenon has been reported consistently enough that it's part of local maritime lore. Captains know the story. They've seen the phantom plane, and every time someone reports it, Valerie Van Heest gets another call. So where does that leave us? 58 people went into the water that night. 58 people whose families were lied to, whose remains were buried in secret, whose final resting place is somewhere in the cold, dark mud of Lake Michigan. Valerie Van Heest hasn't given up. She's still searching. New technology, new methods. She believes the plane is down there, buried under sediment, waiting to be found. But here's what haunts me. This isn't the middle of the ocean. This is a lake. A lake that thousands of boats cross every year. A lake that we've studied, mapped, and searched for 70 years. And yet, Flight 22501 is still missing. At the time, it was the deadliest commercial aviation disaster in American history. And we still don't have the wreckage. We don't have answers. We don't have closure. Just a flash of light over the water, and 58 ghosts still waiting to come home. October 16th, 1972. Anchorage, Alaska. The sky is the color of old steel. Low clouds hang over the Chugach Mountains like a shroud, and the air smells of ice and aviation fuel. At the airport, a small twin-engine Cessna 310 sits on the tarmac, engines warming up for a flight to Juneau. This is not a routine flight. On board are 4 men. 2 of them are among the most powerful politicians in America. One is the House Majority Leader, second in line to the presidency after the Vice President. The other is Alaska's sole congressman fighting for his political life in a tight re-election campaign. The pilot is a bush pilot named Don Johns. He's known for 2 things: flying when other pilots won't, and writing an article titled "Ice Without Fear" about how to navigate Alaska's brutal weather with skill and confidence. In 3 hours, all 4 men will be gone. And despite the largest search and rescue operation in American history up to that point, not a single piece of the plane will ever be found. No wreckage, no bodies, no answers, just the white silence of the Alaskan wilderness, keeping its secrets. Let's talk about who was on that plane, because this isn't just a story about a crash. It's a story about power, paranoia, and a disappearance so clean it's almost surgical. Hale Boggs, 58 years old, Democratic congressman from Louisiana, House Majority Leader, a man with immense influence over American policy. But here's what makes his disappearance so strange. Boggs was a member of the Warren Commission, the group tasked with investigating the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. And Boggs had doubts. In the years after the Warren report was published, Boggs became the only commission member to publicly question the findings. He believed the FBI had withheld critical information. He claimed his phone was being tapped by J. Edgar Hoover. In a speech on the House floor, he accused the FBI of using Gestapo tactics. This is 1972, the height of Watergate paranoia. Trust in government is collapsing, and now one of the most vocal critics of the intelligence community is about to get on a small plane and fly into some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. Nick Begich, 40 years old, Alaska's congressman, running for re-election. A rising star in the Democratic Party. He needs to get to Juneau for a fundraiser. It's critical. The election is in 3 weeks. Russell Brown, Begich's aide, young, loyal, along for the ride. And then there's the pilot, Don Johns, 38 years old, owner of Pan Alaska Airways, a small charter service, 17,000 hours of flight time. An experienced pilot, no question. But here's the thing. Johns had a reputation. He was known as a cowboy, a risk-taker, the kind of pilot who would fly when the weather shut everyone else down. And just 1 month before this flight, he had published an article in Flying magazine. The title? Ice Without Fear. In it, he argued that pilots could safely navigate icing conditions through skill, preparation, and mental toughness. He wrote about maintaining a mental picture of the weather and always having an alternate course of action. The irony is almost unbearable. The flight plan is straightforward. Anchorage to Juneau, about 550 miles, 3.5 hours. The route takes them southeast along the coastline, threading through the valleys and passes of the Chugach Mountains. The critical point is Portage Pass, a narrow corridor of air between towering peaks. It's notorious. Pilots know it. The winds funnel through the pass, creating violent turbulence. Clouds cling to the mountains. Visibility can drop to 0 in seconds. And in October, there's ice, always ice. The weather forecast that morning is grim. Freezing rain, low cloud ceilings, moderate to severe icing predicted between 6,000 and 15,000 feet. Other pilots look at the forecast and decide to stay grounded. The conditions are marginal at best, lethal at worst. But Johns files his flight plan. The VIPs are waiting. The fundraiser can't be missed. At 9:08 a.m., the Cessna 310 takes off from Anchorage. The last confirmed position is near Portage Pass, about 90 minutes into the flight. And then, nothing. No distress call, no mayday, no radio contact. The plane simply stops responding. By early afternoon, Juneau realizes the flight is overdue. The alarm is raised, and the search begins. Now, this is where it gets strange. Let me put this in perspective. This was not a random tourist plane. This was the House Majority Leader of the United States and a sitting congressman. The U.S. government threw everything at this search: 40 military aircraft, 50 civilian planes, Coast Guard cutters, helicopters, ground teams, search dogs. The operation covered 325,000 square miles of Alaskan wilderness. It lasted 39 days. They even deployed the SR-71 Blackbird, one of the most advanced spy planes in the world, to take high-altitude reconnaissance photos of the search area. This was a machine designed to photograph Soviet missile silos, and they used it to look for a Cessna in the snow. And they found nothing. Not a wing, not a tail section, not a scrap of metal, not a fuel slick, not a body, nothing. Let's think about this logically. A Cessna 310 is not a small plane. It's 32 feet long with a 38-foot wingspan. It has 2 engines, landing gear, fuel tanks, and 4 human bodies inside. Even if the plane disintegrated on impact, something should have survived. A seat, a life raft, a piece of luggage. But the Alaskan wilderness gave nothing back. Here's where the logic starts to break down. Don Johns filed a flight plan. Part of that plan included confirming that he had an emergency locator transmitter, ELT, on board. An ELT is a small radio beacon that activates on impact, sending out a distress signal that search planes can home in on. Johns told the tower, "Affirmative, ELT on board." But after the search ended, investigators went back to Johns's office in Fairbanks. They found his portable ELT sitting on a shelf in a different plane. He lied, or he forgot. Either way, the plane that carried 2 of the most powerful men in America into the mountains had no emergency beacon. So when it went down, and it did go down, there was no signal, no electronic breadcrumb trail, just the silent vastness of the Chugach Range swallowing them whole. Let's talk about the theories, because the official explanation is weather and ice, but that's not the whole story. Theory 1, the ice trap. The most accepted explanation is that Johns flew into severe icing conditions. Ice forms on the wings, disrupting airflow and destroying lift. It adds weight. The plane becomes heavier and less aerodynamic. At the same time, ice builds up on the propellers, reducing thrust. In a Cessna 310, you're already flying at relatively low altitude because of the mountains. If you start losing lift and power, you have seconds to react. If you stall, you spin. If you spin in a narrow mountain pass, you're dead. The plane likely hit a ridge or a valley wall. The impact would be catastrophic. In the heavy snowfall that followed, the wreckage would be buried within hours. Over the decades, glaciers move. Snow accumulates. The plane could be under 50 feet of ice by now, entombed like a fly in amber. This explains the lack of debris. But it doesn't explain the complete absence of any trace. Even buried wreckage eventually surfaces. Glaciers calve, avalanches expose metal. Theory 2, the downdraft. Portage Pass is a wind tunnel. On a stormy day, the winds can exceed 100 miles per hour, funneling through the narrow gap between peaks. This creates violent downdrafts, columns of descending air that can slam a small plane into the ground before the pilot can react. If Johns flew into a microburst, the plane would have been pushed down with thousands of pounds of force. No altitude to recover, no time to transmit, just a sudden, brutal end. Again, this is plausible. But where's the wreckage? Theory 3. Political assassination. Here's where it gets dark. Hale Boggs was not a popular man in certain circles. He had accused the FBI of domestic spying. He had questioned the Warren Commission's conclusions about JFK's assassination. He was a thorn in the side of J. Edgar Hoover. And then he gets on a small plane in Alaska, one of the most remote places on Earth, and vanishes without a trace. Some believe the plane was sabotaged, a bomb, timed to explode over the mountains where the debris would be impossible to find. The lack of wreckage isn't an accident. It's intentional. The plane was vaporized or scattered across an inaccessible glacier. Is there evidence? No, not really. But here's the thing. If you were going to make someone disappear, this is how you'd do it. Remote location, bad weather, a pilot known for taking risks, and a search area so vast that even with spy planes, you'd never find the pieces. The conspiracy theory persists because the disappearance was too clean. But here's what we know for certain. Don Johns wrote an article called Ice Without Fear. In it, he advised pilots to avoid critical icing ranges and always have an escape plan. And then he flew into a forecast calling for severe icing through a pass known for deadly conditions with a plane that had no emergency beacon. The National Transportation Safety Board reviewed the case. They concluded that Johns violated basic safety protocols. He flew VFR, visual flight rules, into conditions that required IFR, instrument flight rules. He ignored the weather. He trusted his skill over the reality of physics. And it killed him, and it killed 3 others. Here's the legacy. Because of this crash, the U.S. government mandated that all aircraft must carry emergency locator transmitters. It became federal law. Hale Boggs' death directly led to a policy that has saved thousands of lives, but the men themselves, they're still out there. Somewhere in the Chugach Mountains, under the ice and snow, 4 bodies lie in the wreckage of a Cessna 310, frozen, preserved, waiting. The search officially ended in 1972. But every few years, someone tries again. New technology, new leads, new hope, and every time, the mountains keep their secret. Was it weather? Almost certainly. Was it something more? We'll probably never know, because the Alaskan wilderness doesn't give back what it takes. And on October 16, 1972, it took the House Majority Leader of the United States and swallowed him whole. November 24, 1971. Portland International Airport, the day before Thanksgiving. It's cold. The kind of cold that seeps through your coat and settles in your bones. Rain is coming down in sheets, turning the tarmac into a mirror of reflected light. Inside the terminal, it's chaos. Families rushing to catch flights, businessmen checking their watches, the hum of thousands of conversations blending into white noise. At gate 46, a man in a dark suit stands quietly in line. He's unremarkable. Mid-40s maybe, about 6 feet tall, dark hair, olive complexion. He's wearing a black raincoat, a white shirt, and a narrow black tie. The clip-on kind you can buy at J.C. Penney for a couple of bucks. He's carrying a briefcase. He buys a one-way ticket to Seattle, cash. The name on the ticket, Dan Cooper. He boards Northwest Orient Flight 305, a Boeing 727 with 36 passengers and 6 crew members. He takes seat 18E near the back, orders a bourbon and soda, lights a cigarette. The flight attendant, Florence Schaffner, notices him but doesn't think much of it. Just another businessman heading home for the holiday. And then he hands her a note. She assumes it's a phone number. Guys do this all the time. Hit on flight attendants, slip them their digits. She smiles politely and tucks it in her pocket without reading it. The man leans forward. His voice is calm, almost apologetic. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Let's pause here, because this moment is important. Florence Schaffner opens the note. It's handwritten in neat block letters. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit next to me. You are being hijacked." She looks at him. He opens the briefcase just enough for her to see inside. Wires, red cylinders. It looks like dynamite. Now, think about the atmosphere inside that cabin. It's 1971. Hijackings are common. There were over 130 attempted hijackings in the U.S. between 1968 and 1972. But most hijackers are desperate, erratic, shouting demands. This man is different. He is polite. He is calm. He orders another bourbon. Florence sits down next to him. He gives her his demands. 1. $200,000 in cash, 20s, negotiable American currency. 2. 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve. 3. A fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane. He adds one more detail. When they land in Seattle, he wants the passengers released, but the crew stays. He's not interested in hostages. He just wants the money and a way out. Florence takes the note to the cockpit. Captain William Scott reads it in radio's air traffic control. Within minutes, the plan is in motion. The plane circles above Seattle while the FBI scrambles to gather the ransom. And here's the thing. Cooper is not panicking. He's not pacing. He's not threatening anyone. He sits in his seat sipping bourbon, smoking Raleigh cigarettes, and looking out the window at the rain. The flight attendants later describe him as nice, considerate. One of them said he seemed almost embarrassed by the whole situation. This is not the profile of a desperate criminal. This is a man executing a plan. At 5:45 p.m., the plane lands at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The passengers are told there's a minor mechanical issue. They're deplaned without ever knowing they were part of a hijacking. Cooper keeps the flight crew, 2 pilots, a flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant, Tina Mucklow. The FBI delivers the ransom, $200,000 in $20 bills bundled with rubber bands. The serial numbers are recorded. They also deliver 4 parachutes, 2 military-style main chutes, and 2 reserves. Cooper inspects the parachutes. He chooses the military-style NB-8 back chute. Then he does something strange. He opens one of the reserve chutes and cuts the cords. Some investigators think he used the cords to tie the money bag to his body. Others think he was just examining the equipment. He releases Tina Mucklow and orders the pilots to take off again. The destination, Mexico City. But he gives very specific instructions. Fly at 10,000 feet, no higher. Keep the speed at 170 knots, about 200 miles per hour. Slow. Deploy the landing gear. Keep it down. Set the flaps to 15 degrees. Leave the aft air stair unlocked. The crew is confused. These settings are bizarre. Flying that slow, that low, with the gear down, it's inefficient, burns more fuel, and makes the plane unstable. But they comply. Cooper sends everyone to the cockpit. He stays in the cabin, alone, with $200,000 in a parachute. At 8 p.m., somewhere over the dense forests of southern Washington, near the town of Ariel, the crew feels a sudden change in cabin pressure. It's subtle but unmistakable, like your ears popping. The aft air stair has deployed. The pilots radio back to Cooper. No response. They land in Reno, Nevada as instructed. The FBI boards the plane. The cabin is empty. The money is gone. The parachute is gone. And so is Dan Cooper. Now, this is where it gets strange. Let's talk about the logic gaps, because this case is full of them. The FBI's official position is that Cooper died. Their reasoning? He jumped into a freezing rainstorm at night over dense forest, wearing a business suit and loafers. He had no survival gear. The temperature at 10,000 feet was around 7 degrees below zero. The wind chill would have been brutal. He was flying blind. No way to see the ground. No way to steer the military-style parachute he chose. They argue he hit the trees, broke his neck, and his body is still out there somewhere, buried under decades of moss and fallen leaves. But here's the problem. If he died, where is he? The FBI searched the suspected drop zone extensively. They used ground teams, helicopters, infrared imaging. They found nothing. No parachute, no briefcase, no body, no bones. And more importantly, why go through all this trouble if you're planning to die? Think about it. Cooper demanded $200,000 in negotiable American currency. Not gold, not diamonds, money he could spend. That implies a plan to survive, to escape, to live. He specified 4 parachutes, suggesting he knew what he was doing. He understood the physics of skydiving well enough to demand 2 reserves in case the FBI tried to give him a sabotaged chute. This is not the profile of a suicidal man. This is a man who believed he could make it. Let's talk about the money, because this is where the case gets really weird. In 1980, 9 years after the hijacking, a kid named Brian Ingram is building a fire pit on the banks of the Columbia River at a place called Tina Bar. He's digging in the sand when he uncovers a rotting bundle of $20 bills. The serial numbers match the ransom money. He found $5,800, still bound with rubber bands. Now, here's the thing. Rubber bands don't last 9 years in the elements. They degrade, they snap, they disintegrate. But these rubber bands were intact when the money was found. They only crumbled when investigators handled them. So how did the money get there? The FBI's theory: Cooper's body washed down the river. The money came loose. It settled in the sand at Tina Bar. But there are problems with this. Tina Bar is upstream from the calculated drop zone. Water doesn't flow uphill. If the money washed down from Cooper's body, it should have been found downstream, not upstream. Some researchers believe the money was buried shortly after the hijacking, while the rubber bands were still pliable, and was later exposed by dredging or erosion. But if that's true, it means Cooper survived long enough to bury the money, or someone else did. And what about the other $194,200? In 50 years, not a single additional bill is surfaced. If Cooper died and the money scattered, some of it should have turned up by now. People find money, kids find money. The forest gives up its secrets eventually, but the money stayed hidden. All of it, except for that one bundle at Tina Bar. Let's talk about the tie. Cooper left his clip-on tie on the seat. That tie has been analyzed more thoroughly than almost any piece of evidence in criminal history. In 2011, researchers examined it using electron microscopy and found something fascinating: microscopic particles of rare earth elements, titanium and stainless steel embedded in the fabric. In 1971, titanium was not a common material. It was cutting-edge aerospace technology used primarily in military aircraft and high-end engineering projects. The specific titanium alloy found on the tie matches materials produced by companies that were subcontractors for Boeing. This suggests Cooper worked in aerospace manufacturing. He wasn't just some random guy who decided to hijack a plane. He was an insider, someone who understood the Boeing 727 intimately because he may have helped build them. But here's the frustrating part. Even with DNA evidence from the tie, the FBI has never identified him. They've tested hundreds of suspects. No match. How does a man commit the most famous unsolved crime in American history and leave zero trace of his real identity? Let's look at the theories, because there are dozens. Theory 1. He died in the jump, the FBI's baseline. The conditions were lethal. The jump was suicidal. He's buried somewhere in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, decomposed beyond recognition. But no body, no parachute, no evidence. Theory 2. He survived and vanished. Some believe Cooper was a skilled paratrooper, possibly ex-military, possibly special forces. He knew how to jump at night. He knew how to navigate by instruments. He landed safely, buried some of the money at Tina Bar as a distraction, and disappeared into a new life. The problem: if he survived, why not spend the money? Why let $200,000 rot in the ground? Theory 3. He was Richard McCoy Jr. In 1972, just months after Cooper's jump, a man named Richard McCoy Jr. hijacked a plane using an almost identical method. Same parachute, same ransom. He was caught, escaped from prison, and was killed in a shootout with the FBI. Some believe McCoy was Cooper, but the physical descriptions don't match. And McCoy had an alibi. He was home with his family for Thanksgiving dinner the night of the hijacking. Theory 4. He was an aerospace engineer. The titanium evidence suggests Cooper worked in the aerospace industry. He was laid off during the Boeing downturn of the early 1970s. He used his insider knowledge to pull off the heist, survive the jump, and reintegrated into society. This is currently the most scientifically supported theory, but again, no match in any database, so where does that leave us? In 2016, the FBI officially closed the case. After 45 years of investigation, thousands of leads, and hundreds of suspects, they gave up. Dan Cooper, whoever he was, beat the house. Whether he's buried in the woods or living under a new name on a beach in Mexico, he remains the only hijacker in U.S. history to escape unidentified. And every year, on November 24th, someone leaves a bourbon and soda at the bar in Portland, a toast to the ghost, the man who jumped into the storm and was never seen again. October 26, 1944. Mines Field, Los Angeles, what we now call LAX. It's late afternoon, and the California coast is wrapped in a thick blanket of fog. Not the romantic kind you see in movies. This is June gloom in October, a dense marine layer that rolls in from the Pacific and swallows everything. Visibility is near zero. The air smells of salt and aviation fuel. You can hear the ocean, but you can't see it. On the tarmac sits a brand new P-51D Mustang, serial number 44159. It's painted in bare aluminum, polished to a mirror shine. This is the Cadillac of the skies, the fastest, most advanced fighter plane in the American arsenal. It has a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine that sounds like thunder when it starts. It can hit 440 miles per hour. It was designed to escort bombers deep into Nazi territory and come home alive. And today, it's being flown by a 32-year-old woman from New Jersey. Her name is Gertrude Tompkins Silver. She's a WASP, a woman Air Force service pilot. She's one of just over 1,000 women in the entire country trained to fly military aircraft. She has a stutter, she's shy, she blushes when people talk to her, but in the cockpit, she's fearless. She married a soldier named Henry Silver exactly 1 month ago. The wedding was quick, maybe too quick. Some of her friends wondered if she was really in love or just caught up in the wartime rush. Everyone was getting married in 1944, afraid there wouldn't be a tomorrow. But she seemed happy. She wore a ring, she talked about the future, and then she climbed into a fighter plane and disappeared. Let's set the scene properly, because the context matters. This is 1944. The home front is a different world. Los Angeles is a fortress. The coast is militarized. There are anti-aircraft batteries on the beaches, barrage balloons floating over the harbor. The fear of a Japanese attack is real. And the secrecy around military operations is absolute. The WASP program is controversial. These women are flying bombers, fighters, and cargo planes to free up male pilots for combat duty. But they're not officially part of the military. They're civilians. If they die, their families don't get military honors. They don't get death benefits. And a lot of men, powerful men, think women have no business flying at all. So when a WASP goes missing, there's pressure to keep it quiet. Don't make a fuss, don't draw attention, just find her and move on. Gertrude's mission that day was a ferry flight. Take the brand new P-51D from Los Angeles to Newark, New Jersey with a fuel stop in Palm Springs. It's a routine assignment. She's done it before. But nothing about this day is routine. Here's what happened. 3 WASPs are scheduled to fly out together, a small formation of Mustangs heading east, safety in numbers. Gertrude is one of them. But as she's taxiing out, there's a problem. The canopy latch won't close. It's a mechanical issue, annoying but fixable. The other 2 pilots can't wait. They have a schedule to keep, so they take off without her. Mechanics fix the latch. Gertrude climbs back into the cockpit. She starts the engine, that deep guttural roar of the Merlin V-12. She taxis to the runway, and at around 4 LPM she takes off. The plan is simple. Head west over the ocean to gain altitude, then bank east toward Palm Springs. Standard procedure. You don't want to climb over the city. Too much risk if something goes wrong. Gertrude lifts off. The wheels retract. The Mustang climbs into the fog. And that's it. She never checks in with Palm Springs. She never radios the tower. The other 2 pilots wait for her. Hours pass. She doesn't show. By the next morning, it's clear. Gertrude Tompkins Silver is missing. Now, this is where it gets strange. When a military aircraft goes missing, there's supposed to be an immediate search. Alerts go out, search planes scramble, the Coast Guard is notified. But with Gertrude, there's a delay. A 4-day delay. Why? Because of a clerical error. Her flight plan was either misfiled or never properly logged. The tower in Palm Springs didn't know she was coming, so they didn't report her missing. The base in Los Angeles assumed she'd arrived safely. It wasn't until October 30th, 4 days later, that someone realized a Wasp and a P-51 Mustang were unaccounted for. By then, any debris field would have dispersed, any oil slick would have dissipated. The trail was cold before the search even began. But here's the thing. There was a witness. A 12-year-old boy named Frank Jacobs was fishing off the Manhattan Beach Pier that afternoon. He saw a plane, low, struggling, fall out of the fog and hit the water. He told his father. His father dismissed it. "You're seeing things, kid." It wasn't until decades later that Frank came forward with his story. By then, he was an old man, but his account placed the crash in the shallow waters of Santa Monica Bay, just a few miles offshore. And yet, despite multiple searches, sonar sweeps, and dive expeditions, Gertrude's P-51 has never been found. Let's talk about the logic gaps, because this case is full of them. The runaway bride theory. Some people whispered that Gertrude didn't crash. She ran away, faked her death, started a new life somewhere else. The evidence they point to: she left her wedding ring behind in her flight bag. Not on her finger. In her bag. But let's think about this logically. How do you run away in a P-51 Mustang? You can't just land a fighter plane in a field and walk away. Someone will notice. The plane is worth a fortune. It's military property. And in 1944, airspace over the U.S. is heavily monitored. If she landed somewhere unauthorized, she'd be arrested immediately. And more importantly, why would she run? She'd just married. She'd landed her dream job flying the most advanced aircraft in the world. She was living the life most women in 1944 could only imagine. Running away doesn't make sense. The sabotage theory. This one is darker. Gertrude wasn't just any pilot. She was a woman flying in a man's world, and not all the men were happy about it. There are documented cases of sabotage against Wasps, sugar and gas tanks, loosened bolts, accidents that weren't accidents. Some male mechanics resented the women. Some male pilots thought they were a joke. Could someone have tampered with Gertrude's plane? It's possible. The canopy latch that delayed her takeoff could have been more than a mechanical glitch. If someone wanted to ground her, or worse, a faulty latch would do it. But here's the problem. If the plane was sabotaged, the wreckage would tell us: metal fatigue, severed control cables, explosive residue. We'd need the plane to prove sabotage, and we don't have the plane. The fog theory. This is the most likely explanation, and it's tragically simple. Gertrude took off into a wall of fog. Visibility was near zero. The P-51 Mustang is a powerful machine, but it has a critical flaw. When the rear fuselage fuel tank is full, the center of gravity shifts backward. The plane becomes unstable in pitch. If you pull up too hard, it can snap into a spin. A spin in a P-51 is violent, disorienting, and at low altitude, there's no room to recover. If Gertrude lost her visual horizon in the fog, if she became spatially disoriented, she could have entered a spiral dive. The plane would have hit the water at over 300 miles per hour. At that speed, water acts like concrete. The impact would shatter the airframe. The engine, 12 cylinders of cast iron and steel weighing over a ton, would sink like an anchor. The boy on the pier described seeing a plane fall into the water. That matches a loss of control scenario. But if that's true, where is the wreckage? Here's what doesn't make sense. Santa Monica Bay is not the Pacific Ocean. It's shallow. The average depth is 60 feet. Divers know this bay intimately. They've searched it for decades. In 2009, searchers found a jet wreck in the bay. They thought it was Gertrude's plane. Excitement surged. Newspapers ran headlines, but it turned out to be a T-33 trainer from the 1950s. The bay is full of wrecks, ships, boats, other planes, but not Gertrude's P-51. How does a 30-foot-long fighter plane made of aluminum and steel vanish in 60 feet of water? Theories. It's buried. Decades of silt and sand have covered the wreckage. It's down there, but it's invisible to sonar. It's farther out. The boy on the pier was mistaken about the location. The plane actually crashed miles offshore in deeper water. It broke apart. The impact was so violent that the plane disintegrated into small fragments. What's left doesn't look like a plane anymore, just scattered pieces of metal that blend into the seabed. But none of these explanations are fully satisfying. Let's talk about Gertrude herself, because her story is more than just a mystery. It's a tragedy. She wasn't supposed to be a pilot. Women in 1944 were supposed to be secretaries, nurses, mothers. But Gertrude had a dream. She wanted to fly. She overcame a stutter that made her self-conscious. She pushed past the men who told her she didn't belong. She earned her wings. She became one of the elite. And then, 1 month after getting married, she climbed into a fighter plane and flew into the fog. Her husband, Henry Silver, spent the rest of his life wondering what happened. Did she crash? Did she suffer? Did she think of him in those final moments? He never got answers. Here's the haunting part. During World War II, 38 women Air Force service pilots died in the line of duty. 38 women who gave their lives flying for their country. 37 of them were recovered. They were buried. Their families got closure. Gertrude Tompkins Silver is the only one who was never found. She's still out there. Somewhere in the cold, dark water of Santa Monica Bay, or buried under decades of silt, her P-51 Mustang sits waiting. Groups like Project 51 are still searching. They use sonar, magnetometers, side-scan imaging. Every few years there's a new lead, a new anomaly on the seabed, and every time it turns out to be something else. So where does that leave us? Gertrude was a bride, a patriot, a pioneer. She flew the fastest plane in the world. She defied the expectations of her era. She proved that women could do anything men could do. And then, she vanished into the gray mist of history. No wreckage, no body, no closure, just a name on a memorial wall, and a question that's haunted the California coast for 80 years. Where is Gertrude Tompkins Silver? And why won't the ocean give her back? March 10, 1956, MacDill Air Force Base, Florida. It's just before dawn. The tarmac is alive with the whine of jet engines and the smell of JP-4 fuel. A Boeing B-47 Stratojet sits gleaming under the floodlights, a 6-engine swept-wing bomber, sleek and fast, built for one purpose: to deliver nuclear weapons deep into Soviet territory and come home alive. Serial number 52, 5, and 34. Today, it's not carrying a bomb, it's carrying something worse. In the bomb bay, secured in protective transport capsules, are 2 plutonium cores. Not full weapons, just the cores. The hearts of nuclear bombs, the part that goes critical, the part that ends cities. This is 1956, the height of the Cold War. The US and the Soviet Union are locked in a nuclear chess match, and the Mediterranean is the board. American bombers are constantly rotating to forward bases in Europe and North Africa, maintaining a presence, projecting power, reminding the Soviets that the US can strike anywhere, anytime. This flight is part of that rotation, a routine logistical ferry mission, MacDill Air Force Base in Florida to Ben Guerir Air Base in Morocco, over 5,000 miles. Non-stop with 2 mid-air refuelings. The crew is small, just 3 men. Captain Robert H. Hodgen, 31 years old. The aircraft commander, Captain Gordon M. Inslee, 32 years old. The navigator. Second Lieutenant Ronald L. Kurtz, 22 years old. The pilot. They're professionals, veterans of the Strategic Air Command. They've done this flight before, but this time they won't arrive. Let's set the scene properly, because the atmosphere is everything. Imagine you're in the cockpit of a B-47. It's loud, 6 jet engines screaming at 80% thrust. The cockpit is cramped. There's no autopilot worth trusting. You're flying by hand, by instruments, across an ocean in the dark. You've been flying for hours. Your body aches. Your eyes are dry. You're surviving on coffee and adrenaline. Below you is nothing but black water. No ships, no lights, just the void. And in the bomb bay behind you, 2 capsules of plutonium. You try not to think about it. This is the Cold War. Every flight is a mission, every mission is a test, and failure is not an option. The flight plan is brutal but straightforward. Take off from Florida, fly east across the Atlantic, meet a KC-97 tanker over the ocean for the first refueling, continue across the Mediterranean, meet a second tanker southwest of Oran, Algeria for the final top-off, then land in Morocco. The first part of the flight goes perfectly. The Atlantic crossing is smooth. The first refueling is flawless. The B-47 is on schedule, on course, and performing beautifully. But as they approach the Mediterranean, the weather changes. A thick layer of cloud, dense, wet, suffocating, blankets the sea. Visibility drops to 0. The sky and the water blend into a gray void, and somewhere in that void, the bomber disappears. Here's what we know. At around 14,000 feet, the B-47 makes contact with the second tanker, a KC-97 stratofreighter orbiting about 90 miles southwest of Oran, Algeria. The tanker crew is waiting. They're ready to refuel. The B-47 crew radios their position. They acknowledge the rendezvous point. They report they're descending through the clouds to meet the tanker at the refueling altitude. And then, silence. The tanker crew waits. They listen to the radio. They scan the sky. They see nothing but clouds. The B-47 never checks in again. It never arrives at the refueling point. It never makes radio contact. It simply vanishes. By the time the sun rises, it's clear. The bomber is missing. The U.S. Air Force launches a massive search and rescue operation. Ships, planes, helicopters. They scour the Mediterranean, focusing on the area southwest of Oran. They find nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no floating wreckage, no bodies, and critically, no radiation signature. The Mediterranean swallowed the bomber whole. Now, this is where it gets strange. Let's talk about the logic gaps, because this disappearance defies explanation. The explosion theory. The immediate assumption is that the plane exploded. Maybe the engines caught fire. Maybe the plutonium capsules were damaged. Maybe there was a catastrophic failure. But here's the problem. Explosions leave evidence. If a B-47, 100 tons of aluminum, steel, and fuel, explodes in mid-air, people see it. There was a French merchant ship directly below the flight path. They reported seeing nothing. No flash, no fireball, no plume of smoke. And even if the explosion happened inside the clouds, the debris would still fall. Pieces of the fuselage, engine parts, fuel tanks. When a plane disintegrates at 14,000 feet, it creates a debris field miles wide. The search teams found nothing. No floating seats, no life jackets, no scraps of metal. If the plane exploded, where is the wreckage? The water impact theory. Okay, so maybe the plane didn't explode. Maybe it suffered a mechanical failure, engine failure, structural failure, pilot error, and crashed into the sea intact. But here's the thing. Even intact crashes leave debris. When a plane hits water, it breaks apart, wings shear off, the fuselage crumples, fuel tanks rupture. Aviation fuel is lighter than water. It floats. It creates an oil slick that can persist for days, visible from miles away. The search teams found no oil slick. They also found no floating debris, no seat cushions, no doors, no pieces of the tail section. When Air France 447 crashed into the Atlantic in 2009, searchers found floating debris within days. That was in the middle of the ocean. This was the Mediterranean, a busy, heavily trafficked sea. Ships passed through this area constantly. If there was debris, someone would have seen it. But there was nothing. So how does a plane this big, 93 feet long, with a 116-foot wingspan, hit the water without leaving a trace? The Soviet interception theory. This is where the conspiracy theories begin. Some people believe the plane was intercepted by Soviet fighters, shot down, or forced to land. The Soviets wanted the plutonium. They wanted the technology. They wanted to embarrass the U.S. But this theory has problems. First, The crash site was deep in NATO airspace, southwest of Algeria. Soviet fighters in 1956 didn't have the range to operate that far from home. They'd have to fly from bases in Eastern Europe or the Soviet Union, refuel somehow, penetrate NATO radar coverage, intercept the bomber, and escape undetected. It's not impossible, but it's extremely unlikely. Second, if the Soviets shot down the plane, there would be debris. A shootdown is violent. Missiles shred aircraft. Cannon fire tears through fuselages. The wreckage would scatter over a wide area. And third, if the Soviets had captured the plutonium, they would have used it for propaganda. They would have paraded it in front of the world, proof of American recklessness. They never did. Let's talk about what was on that plane, because this is the part that still haunts the U.S. government. The official term is broken arrow, a military code for an accident involving nuclear weapons or components that does not create a risk of nuclear war. The B-47 was carrying 2 capsules of weapons-grade plutonium. Not complete bombs, just the cores. But that's enough. Here's the terrifying part. Plutonium-239 has a half-life of 24,000 years. That means right now, in 2026, 70 years after the crash, those cores are still down there, somewhere on the floor of the Mediterranean Sea, encased in their protective capsules, slowly corroding. The capsules were designed to withstand immense pressure and impact. They were built to survive a crash, and by all accounts, they probably did. But eventually, they will fail. Salt water corrodes everything. Over decades, over centuries, the seals will degrade. The plutonium will be exposed. Will it contaminate the sea? Probably not. The Mediterranean is vast, and the plutonium will likely remain localized. But the fact that we don't know, that we can't find it, is disturbing. The U.S. government has never officially acknowledged the exact nature of the cargo. The details remain classified, but the incident is listed in the official Broken Arrow database. Translation: we lost nukes, and we don't know where they are. Let's look at the most likely theory. The B-47 was descending through thick cloud to meet the tanker at 14,000 feet. The pilots were flying on instruments, no visual references, no horizon, just gauges and needles. Spatial disorientation is a killer in these conditions. Your inner ear tells you one thing, your instruments tell you another. If you trust your instincts instead of your instruments, you die. It's called a graveyard spiral. The plane banks into a turn. The pilot feels like he's flying straight and level, but he's actually descending in a tightening spiral. By the time he realizes what's happening, it's too late. The plane hits the water at 400 miles per hour. At that speed, water doesn't compress. It acts like concrete. The impact is catastrophic. The fuselage shatters. The engines tear free. The wings crumple. Everything disintegrates. And because the plane hits so hard, so fast, the wreckage doesn't float. The heavy components, the engines, the plutonium capsules, the landing gear, sink immediately. The lighter pieces are shredded into fragments too small to be spotted from the air. Within minutes, the Mediterranean closes over the wreckage. The currents carry away any trace of oil. The debris settles into the deep, and the bomber becomes a ghost. Here's what haunts me about this case. 3 men climbed into a plane in Florida. They were doing their job, flying a routine mission. They had families, they had futures. And somewhere over the Mediterranean, in the gray soup of the clouds, they ceased to exist. Captain Robert Hodgen, Captain Gordon Inslee, Second Lieutenant Ronald Kurtz. Their families never got bodies to bury. No coffins, no funerals. Just a telegram from the Air Force. Missing in action, presumed lost at sea. And somewhere, deep in the cold, dark water, the wreckage of the B-47 sits waiting. A tomb for 3 men and a graveyard for 2 nuclear cores. The Mediterranean keeps its secrets, and the ghost of 52-534 is still down there, rusting in the silence, guarding the plutonium that was never meant to sleep beneath the waves. A broken arrow, lost forever. January 26, 1950. Elmendorf Air Force Base, Anchorage, Alaska. It's 40 degrees below zero. The kind of cold that burns your lungs when you breathe. The kind of cold that turns your breath into crystals that tinkle when they hit the ground. The sun is low on the horizon, a pale, distant circle that offers light but no warmth. On the tarmac sits a Douglas C-54 Skymaster. Serial number 4272469. It's a 4-engine transport workhorse, the military version of the DC-4. This is the plane that won World War II, not with bombs, but with logistics. It hauled troops, carried cargo, and evacuated the wounded. It's reliable, sturdy, and proven. Today, it's flying a routine milk run, Alaska to Montana, a simple repositioning flight, nothing dangerous, nothing exciting. On board are 44 people, 8 crew members, 36 passengers. Most of them are servicemen heading back to the lower 48 after tours in Alaska. But there are civilians too, among them a woman named Joyce Espy and her infant son, Victor. She's pregnant. She's going home to meet her husband. This is not a combat mission. This is people going home. The pilot is First Lieutenant Kyle L. McMichael, 28 years old, experienced, competent. He's flown this route before. At around noon, the C-54 takes off and heads southeast, following the established airway along the Alaska Highway. The flight plan calls for check-ins at radio stations along the route: Snag, Aishihik, Whitehorse, standard procedure. 2 hours into the flight, McMichael radios the station at Snag, Yukon Territory. His voice is calm, professional. He reports his position. He's on course, on schedule. But then he adds one detail: encountering icing. Ice is forming on the wings. That's the last thing anyone ever hears from Flight 4272469. The plane is due at the next checkpoint, Aishihik, about 100 miles southeast. It never calls in. By evening, it's clear. The C-54 is missing, and so begins one of the largest search and rescue operations in North American history. Operation Mike. Let's set the scene properly, because the environment is the real antagonist here. The Yukon Territory in January is not just cold, it's hostile. Temperatures routinely drop to 40-degree F, sometimes 50-degree T. At those temperatures, exposed skin freezes in seconds, metal becomes brittle, engines seize. Survival times are measured in minutes. The landscape is endless. Forests of pine and spruce stretch to the horizon in every direction. From the air, it's a white and green carpet that looks identical for thousands of square miles. No roads, no towns, just wilderness. If you crash here, you're invisible. The search area is massive, hundreds of thousands of square miles. The U.S. Air Force and the Royal Canadian Air Force throw everything at it. Dozens of planes, hundreds of sorties, pilots flying low over the trees, scanning the snow for any sign of wreckage. Days pass, then weeks. They find nothing. No debris, no smoke, no survivors, no bodies, and then the search itself starts to fall apart. Now, this is where it gets strange. On February 7th, less than 2 weeks into the search, a C-47 search plane crashes on a mountainside. All 10 crew members survive, but they're injured. The rescue becomes a rescue of the rescuers. On February 16th, another search plane, a Royal Canadian Air Force C-47, crashes near Snag. Again, the crew survives, but more rescuers are hurt. The searches are grounded temporarily. The conditions are too dangerous. The same icing, the same downdrafts, the same brutal cold that took down the C-54 are now claiming the planes looking for it. It's as if the wilderness is fighting back. But here's what makes it worse. In the middle of Operation Mike, something else happens. A B-36 Peacemaker, a massive strategic bomber, suffers catastrophic engine failures during a simulated combat mission over British Columbia. The crew is forced to jettison a Mark IV nuclear bomb into the Pacific Ocean before bailing out. It's a broken arrow, a nuclear incident. Suddenly, resources are diverted. Attention shifts. The search for the C-54 loses priority. By March, Operation Mike is officially called off. 44 people are declared missing, presumed dead. No wreckage, no closure, no answers. Let's talk about the logic gaps, because this case is infuriating. Here's the problem. We lose planes in the ocean all the time. The ocean is deep, dark, and vast. A plane can sink to the bottom and disappear forever. That makes sense. But this plane didn't crash in the ocean. It crashed on land, on the North American continent, in a search area that was actively being monitored by dozens of aircraft. When a plane crashes in the forest, it leaves evidence. It breaks trees. It gouges the ground. It creates a scar visible from the air. If the fuel ignites, it burns, and black soot on white snow is impossible to miss. Thousands of flight hours were logged during Operation Mike. Pilots flew low. They scanned the ground. They photographed suspicious areas, and they saw nothing. No scar, no burn mark, no wreckage. How does a 90-foot airplane with a 117-foot wingspan and 4 enormous radial engines vanish on land without leaving a trace? Also, during the search, multiple pilots reported seeing thin columns of smoke rising from the ground, wispy, vertical, the kind of smoke you'd see from a signal fire. Rescue teams were dispatched. They hiked through the snow to the coordinates. They searched the areas thoroughly, and they found nothing. No fire, no survivors, no wreckage. So what was the smoke? Was it survivors trying to signal for help only to succumb to the cold before rescuers arrived? Was it steam from a hot spring? Or was it something stranger, a mirage, a trick of the light, the wilderness playing games? We don't know. Here's another prevailing theory, and it's both elegant and horrifying. The pilot reported icing. Ice forms on the wings, disrupting airflow and adding weight. The plane becomes heavier and less aerodynamic. It starts to lose altitude. In the Yukon, the landscape is dotted with frozen lakes, thousands of them. From the air, a frozen lake covered in snow looks exactly like a clearing in the forest. If Lieutenant McMichael was fighting to keep the plane airborne and he saw what looked like a safe place to land, he might have tried to put the plane down on what he thought was solid ground. But it wasn't ground. It was ice. The C-54 hits the frozen lake. The impact is violent but not catastrophic. The fuselage stays mostly intact. But the weight of the plane, over 65,000 pounds fully loaded, is too much. The ice cracks, the plane breaks through, and then it sinks. Within minutes, the freezing water closes over the wreckage. Within hours, the surface refreezes. Fresh snow falls, covering the cracks. By the time the search planes arrive, there's nothing to see. Just another frozen lake, indistinguishable from 1,000 others. The plane is entombed in ice, 44 people still strapped in their seats, preserved in the cold, waiting. But here's the thing. If this theory is correct, which lake? The search area contains hundreds of lakes. Some are small, just ponds. Others are miles across. In 1950, there were no detailed maps of the region, no satellite imagery, no GPS. Even today, with modern technology, finding the plane is a monumental challenge. You'd have to survey every lake in the corridor between Snag and Aishihik. You'd need sonar, ice-penetrating radar, divers willing to work in freezing, zero-visibility water. It's been tried. Multiple times. Private teams funded by families have searched the most likely lakes. They've found nothing. Let's talk about the people, because this is more than just a mystery. It's a tragedy. 44 souls on board, 8 crew, 36 passengers, among them Joyce Espy, pregnant, traveling with her infant son, Victor. She was going home to meet her husband. Dozens of young servicemen, many of them in their 20s, finishing their tours in Alaska and heading back to the lower 48 to start their lives. Pilots, mechanics, clerks, cooks, ordinary people doing their jobs. Their families never got bodies to bury. No coffins, no gravestones, just empty caskets at memorial services. For decades, the families have lobbied the U.S. and Canadian governments to continue the search. They've hired private investigators. They've funded sonar expeditions. They've scoured old reports looking for clues. And every few years, there's a lead, a new theory, a suspicious sonar signature. And every time it turns out to be nothing. Here's what haunts me about this case. This didn't happen in the middle of nowhere. This happened on a flight path that thousands of planes have flown, over terrain that's been photographed, mapped, and studied. And yet, a 90-foot airplane carrying 44 people is still missing. The wilderness doesn't give back what it takes. In the Arctic, Bodies don't decompose. The cold preserves them. If the plane is in a lake, the occupants are still there, still in their seats, still wearing their uniforms, frozen in time, waiting. So where does that leave us? In 2023, over 70 years after the disappearance, a team called Project Recover announced a new effort to find the C-54. They're using advanced sonar and AI-assisted analysis of satellite imagery. They believe they've narrowed the search area to a handful of lakes, but nothing has been confirmed. The families are aging. The children of the passengers are now in their 70s and 80s. Time is running out, and the Yukon keeps its secret. Somewhere in that vast expanse of white and green, beneath the ice of a nameless lake, sits a Douglas C-54 Skymaster. The engines are still, the propellers are frozen, the fuselage is entombed in silt and ice, and inside, 44 people are waiting to come home. Operation Mike was called off in 1950, but the search has never really ended, because the wilderness doesn't forgive, and it doesn't forget. And until someone finds that lake, the C-54 will remain what it became on January 26, 1950, a ghost in the white tomb of the Yukon. January 30th, 1948, Santa Maria Airport, the Azores. It's just after 3:00 p.m. The sky over the mid-Atlantic is heavy with clouds and the wind is howling. Inside the terminal, passengers are waiting to board a plane that will take them across 2,000 miles of open ocean to Bermuda. The aircraft is an Avro Tudor 4, registration GAHNP. Its name, painted proudly on the nose, Star Tiger. It's a luxury airliner, pressurized cabin, reclining seats, sleek lines. This is supposed to be the future of transatlantic travel. British engineering competing with American dominance, the pride of British South American Airways. But there's a problem. BSAA is cursed. 3 years earlier, they lost Stardust in the Andes. It flew into a mountain and wasn't found for 50 years. In exactly 1 year, they'll lose Star Ariel, the sister ship to Star Tiger, under almost identical circumstances. 3 planes, 3 disappearances, 3 mysteries. But today, January 30th, 1948, no one knows that yet. On board Star Tiger are 31 people, 25 passengers, 6 crew. Among the passengers is Air Marshal Sir Arthur Conyngham, a legend, a fighter ace in World War I, a commander in World War II, a man who helped design air strategy for the D-Day invasion. If anyone understood the dangers of aviation, it was him. The captain is Brian McMillan, an experienced pilot, calm, professional. He's flown this route before. The flight plan is brutal. 2,000 miles of ocean, no landmarks, no emergency landing sites, just water, wind, and the hum of 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines. They're not flying alone. A Lancastrian freighter, another BSAA plane, is flying ahead of them. Acting as a scout, it's checking the weather, reporting back, a buddy system for a dangerous route. At 3:45 p.m., Star Tiger takes off into the wind and disappears into the clouds, heading west toward Bermuda. 12 hours later, it will vanish. Let's set the scene properly, because the atmosphere is everything. Imagine you're sitting in the cabin of Star Tiger. It's dark outside, pitch black. The only light comes from the dim cabin lamps. The windows show nothing but your own reflection and the occasional flash of the navigation lights on the wingtips. The engines drone, a constant numbing roar. It's been droning for hours, 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours. You're exhausted. The cabin is cold, the heaters are working, but they're fighting a losing battle against the freezing air at 10,000 feet. You can feel the vibration of the plane through your seat. You can smell the faint odor of fuel and cigarette smoke. Below you is the Atlantic Ocean. Dark, endless, indifferent. There are no ships, no lights. If something goes wrong, there's nowhere to go. You fall into the black water and you're gone. This is the reality of transatlantic flight in 1948. It's not glamorous, it's a test of endurance, a gamble against the elements. And tonight, the gamble is about to go very, very wrong. Here's what happened. The flight is plagued by headwinds, strong, relentless winds blowing from the west, slowing the plane down. The Lancastrian flying ahead reports that the winds are worse than forecasted. It's being blown miles off course. Star Tiger is experiencing the same thing. The fuel consumption is higher than expected. The engines are working harder. The crew is recalculating constantly. Do they have enough fuel to make it to Bermuda? Captain McMillan makes a decision. To save fuel and avoid the worst of the winds, he's going to drop down. Way down, he descends to 2,000 feet. Let me put that in perspective. Commercial airliners today cruise at 35,000 feet. Even in 1948, most planes flew at 8,000 to 10,000 feet over the ocean. It's safer. You have altitude to trade for distance if something goes wrong. But McMillan takes Star Tiger down to 2,000 feet. Just 2,000 feet above the waves, in the dark, in the middle of the ocean. Why? The official explanation is that wind speeds are lower near the surface. By flying low, the plane would fight less resistance, save fuel, and make better time. But here's the thing. Flying that low is incredibly dangerous. If you misjudge your altitude by even 100 feet, you hit the water. If a downdraft pushes you down, you hit the water. If the pilot gets distracted for 10 seconds, you hit the water. At 2,000 feet, there's no margin for error. And in 1948, altimeters were barometric. They measured air pressure and converted it to altitude. If the pressure changed unexpectedly, if a weather front moved in, the altimeter could read higher than the plane actually was. There's a saying in aviation, high to low, look out below. If you fly from high pressure to low pressure, your altimeter lies to you. It tells you you're at 2,000 feet when you're actually at 1,500 feet, or 1,000 feet, or less. Captain McMillan was flying a tightrope in the dark. At 3 a.m., the Lancastrian scout plane lands safely in Bermuda. It radios back to Star Tiger. We made it. You're next. Weather is clear. Runway is ready. Star Tiger acknowledges. They're about 400 miles out, less than 2 hours to landing. At 3:15 a.m., Star Tiger requests a radio bearing, a navigational fix to confirm their position. The tower in Bermuda provides it. The plane acknowledges. The transmission is clear, routine, professional, and then nothing. No mayday, no distress signal, no garbled transmission, just silence. By dawn, it's clear. Star Tiger is missing. The British and American navies launch a massive search. Ships, planes, hundreds of square miles of ocean are scanned. They find nothing. No oil slick, no floating debris, no bodies, no wreckage. The plane, the passengers, the crew, all 31 people, simply vanished. Now, this is where it gets strange. Let's talk about the logic gaps because this disappearance makes no sense. First, if something goes wrong at 2,000 feet, you have maybe 10 to 20 seconds before you hit the water. But even in a crisis, a trained pilot will try to send a distress call. It's instinct. You reach for the radio. You shout, "Mayday!" Star Tiger said nothing. That suggests the end was instantaneous. No warning, no time to react. What could cause that? A catastrophic structural failure? The plane breaks apart mid-air? But if that happened, there would be debris. Pieces of the fuselage floating on the surface, an explosion, the fuel tanks ignite. Again, debris, floating seats, bodies, something. But there was nothing. Another, most logical theory is controlled flight into terrain, or in this case, controlled flight into water. Flying at 2,000 feet in the dark, the pilots are relying entirely on their instruments. If the altimeter is wrong, if it's reading 2,000 feet when they're actually at 1,000 feet, they could fly the plane straight into the ocean without realizing it. At night, over water, there's no visual horizon. The sky and the sea blend into one black void. You can't tell where one ends and the other begins. If the plane descended gradually, just a few feet per second, the crew might not notice until the propellers were hitting the waves. By then, it's too late. The impact would be catastrophic. The plane would shatter. The heavy engines would sink immediately. The lighter debris would scatter across miles of ocean. But here's the problem. The search began within hours. The sea was calm. Visibility was good. Search planes flew low, scanning the surface. They found nothing. Not a seat cushion, not a life vest, not a suitcase. How does a plane carrying 31 people vanish without leaving a single piece of floating debris? There's another theory, and it's darker. The Avro Tudor 4 had a design flaw. The cabin heaters were located under the floor. They burned aviation fuel to generate heat. If a fuel line leaked, vapors could accumulate in the confined space beneath the passenger cabin. All it would take is a spark, a switch, a short circuit, a static discharge, and the vapors would ignite. An explosion under the floor would sever the control cables. The pilots would lose control instantly. The plane would dive into the ocean before anyone could react. This theory explains the silence. It explains the lack of a distress call, but it doesn't explain the lack of debris. An explosion creates a debris field. Fire scorches metal. Wreckage floats. And yet, the searchers found nothing. Let's talk about the official investigation, because this is where the legend begins. The British Ministry of Civil Aviation conducted an exhaustive inquiry. They interviewed witnesses, they analyzed weather reports, they examined every piece of evidence. And in the end, they wrote one of the most famous sentences in aviation history. What happened in this case will never be known, and the fate of Star Tiger must remain an unsolved mystery. That sentence, that admission of defeat, is what birthed the Bermuda Triangle legend. Because Star Tiger didn't just disappear, it disappeared in a specific area, the Western Atlantic, between Bermuda and the Azores. And exactly 1 year later, Star Ariel, the sister ship, vanished in the same area under almost identical circumstances. 2 planes, same airline, same route. Same result. People started asking, what's happening in that part of the ocean? And the Bermuda Triangle was born. But here's the thing, there's nothing supernatural about this. The Avro Tudor 4 was a flawed aircraft. It had design issues. The heaters were dangerous. The fuel tanks were poorly designed. The center of gravity was sensitive. And the route itself was brutal. 2,000 miles of open ocean, strong winds, no emergency landing sites, flying at the edge of the plane's range. Combine a flawed aircraft with a dangerous route and human error, and you get tragedy, not mystery. Tragedy. So where does that leave us? 31 people climbed onto Star Tiger in the Azores. They were going to Bermuda. They never arrived. Air Marshal Sir Arthur Conyngham, a man who survived 2 world wars, vanished into the Atlantic. Captain Macmillan and his crew, experienced professionals, flew into the void and were never seen again. The disappearance killed the Avro Tudor 4 as a passenger plane. The aircraft was grounded. BSAA collapsed. The Tudor's reputation was destroyed, and the mystery endures. Somewhere on the floor of the Atlantic, deeper than light can reach, sits the wreckage of Star Tiger. The Rolls-Royce engines are corroded. The fuselage is crushed by pressure. The bodies are long gone, consumed by the sea. But the story remains. The plane that gave the Bermuda Triangle its name. The star that fell into the darkness and was never found. December 15th, 1944. Twinwood Farm Airfield, Bedfordshire, England. It's the kind of day where everything looks gray. The sky is gray, the runway is gray. The bare trees are skeletal silhouettes against the fog. The temperature is just above freezing, and a thick mist hangs in the air. The kind of English weather that seeps into your bones and makes you question why anyone ever leaves the pub. Most flights are grounded. The visibility is terrible. Even the birds aren't flying. But on the tarmac sits a small, utilitarian plane. A Nordduin Norseman, a single-engine workhorse designed for bush flying in Canada. It's ugly, functional, and absolutely not built for comfort. There are no seats in the back, just cargo space. And climbing into that plane is the most famous man in the world, Major Glenn Miller, the bandleader, the genius behind In the Mood, Moonlight Serenade, and Chattanooga Choo Choo, the man who turned big band swing into the soundtrack of World War II. He's 40 years old. He's sick, a brutal sinus infection that's been plaguing him for days, and he's terrified of flying. But he needs to get to Paris, desperately. There's a Christmas concert planned. His band is already there, waiting for him. The concert is supposed to boost morale for the troops, broadcast to millions. It's important, critical even. So despite the weather, despite his fear, despite the warnings from everyone around him, Glenn Miller climbs into the back of the Norseman. At 1:55 p.m., the plane takes off into the fog. and Glenn Miller is never seen again. Let's set the scene properly, because the context is everything. This is December 1944. The war in Europe is in its final brutal phase. The Battle of the Bulge is about to erupt. D-Day was 6 months ago. Victory is close but not certain. Morale is fragile. And Glenn Miller is a weapon in the war effort. Before the war, he was a superstar. His band sold millions of records. His radio broadcasts drew audiences in the tens of millions. When he enlisted in 1942, he walked away from a career worth over $20,000 a week, equivalent to millions today, to serve his country. He didn't have to go. He was 38 years old, too old for the draft. But he went anyway, forming the Army Air Force Band. And he took that band across Europe, playing for soldiers in hospitals, on air bases, in makeshift stages in the mud. He was beloved. Soldiers called him Captain Miller. He gave them something to hold on to, music, a piece of home, a reason to believe they'd make it back. And now he's sitting in the back of a freezing cargo plane, trying to make it to Paris through weather that's grounded everyone else. The pilot is Flight Officer John Morgan. He's relatively inexperienced in instrument flying, the kind of flying you do when you can't see anything outside the cockpit. This is a problem, because the weather that day requires instrument flying. Sitting up front with Morgan is Lieutenant Colonel Norman Basil, a senior officer hitching a ride. Basil is known for his bravado, his recklessness. Before boarding, Miller asks a friend, "Where the hell are the parachutes?" Basil laughs. "What's the matter, Miller? Do you want to live forever?" It's a joke, a wartime joke, the kind of dark humor soldiers use to cope. But in hindsight, it's chilling. Here's what we know. The Norseman takes off from Twinwood Farm at 1:55 p.m. The flight plan is simple. Fly south to the English coast, cross the English Channel, and land in Paris. It's a short hop, maybe 90 minutes in good weather. But the weather isn't good. The cloud base is low, around 2,500 feet and dropping. Visibility is near zero. The air is humid and cold, perfect conditions for carburetor icing. The plane is supposed to follow a flight path south toward Beachy Head, then cross the channel at its narrowest point. But here's the problem. There's no flight plan on file. The flight was unofficial, unauthorized. Miller was hitching a ride on a courier flight. No one logged it, no one tracked it. The plane takes off into the fog and disappears. It never radios. It never makes contact with French air traffic control. It never arrives in Paris. By the evening of December 16th, Miller's band in Paris starts to worry. Where is he? He should have arrived yesterday. On December 18th, 3 days after the flight, the U.S. Army officially announces that Major Glenn Miller is missing. The news shocks the world. The biggest pop star on the planet, gone. And to this day, no one knows what happened. Now, this is where it gets strange. Let's talk about the logic gaps, because this case is full of them. Glenn Miller wasn't just anyone. He was the most famous entertainer in the Allied forces. His disappearance should have triggered an immediate search. Planes, ships, rescue teams. But it didn't. Why? Because no one knew he was on the flight. It was unofficial, unlogged. The military didn't know he was missing until his band reported it 3 days later. By then, any wreckage would have sunk. Any debris would have drifted. The trail was ice cold. But here's the thing, even without an official search, someone should have seen something. The English Channel is one of the busiest waterways in the world. Ships cross it constantly. Planes fly over it constantly. If a plane crashed into the channel, someone would have seen the splash, the debris, the oil slick, but no one reported anything. Flight Officer John Morgan was an experienced pilot, but he wasn't qualified for heavy instrument flying. And the weather that day was brutal. Freezing fog, low visibility, icing conditions. So why did he take off? The official theory is that he was pressured. Basil outranked him. Miller was impatient. They wanted to get to Paris, and Morgan felt he couldn't say no. But that doesn't make sense. Pilots have the authority to refuse unsafe flights. It's drilled into them. No-go decisions save lives. Morgan knew the weather was bad. He knew the risks. And yet, he took off anyway. Why? Here is the official explanation, and it's the most logical. The Norseman's engine used a carburetor to mix air and fuel. In cold, humid conditions, like the fog over England that day, water vapor in the air can freeze inside the carburetor. The ice blocks the airflow. The engine loses power. Eventually, it dies. If the engine quit over the channel at low altitude, there's no time to restart it. The plane would glide for maybe a minute, then hit the water. At impact, the Norseman would have broken apart. The heavy engine would sink immediately. The fuselage would flood and go down. Miller, Basil, and Morgan would have drowned or died on impact. The wreckage would be on the bottom of the channel, somewhere in 150 to 200 feet of water. This theory makes sense. It's supported by the weather conditions, the aircraft type, and the pilot's experience level. But it doesn't explain the total lack of debris. Let's talk about the friendly fire theory, because this is where it gets disturbing. For decades, the prevailing explanation was that Miller was killed by his own side. Here's the story. On December 15, 1944, the same day Miller's plane took off, a fleet of 138 Lancaster bombers was returning from an aborted bombing raid over Germany. They were carrying their bombs back to England. Standard procedure: if you land with bombs still on board, there's a risk they'll detonate on impact. So bombers would jettison their unused ordnance over a designated drop zone in the channel before landing. At around 2:00 p.m., these Lancasters were over the channel, dropping bombs. In 1984, a man named Fred Shaw came forward. He was a navigator on one of those Lancasters. He claimed that as his plane released its bombs, he looked down and saw a small aircraft flying below them. He watched the bombs fall. He saw the water erupt in massive geysers, and he saw the small plane flip over and go down. For years, this story was accepted as fact. Documentaries were made, books were written. The official conclusion was that Glenn Miller was killed by friendly fire, crushed by the shockwave of British bombs hitting the water. But here's the problem. The timeline doesn't work. Recent research by Dennis Sprague, a Miller historian, analyzed the flight logs of the Lancaster squadrons. The bombs were dropped at around 1:40 p.m., 15 minutes before Miller's plane even took off, and the drop zone was 20 miles off Miller's flight path. For the friendly fire theory to be true, Morgan would have had to fly wildly off course. Fred Shaw likely saw a plane go down, but it wasn't Glenn Miller's. So what really happened? The most likely explanation is the simplest: carburetor icing. Morgan took off into freezing fog. He was flying low to stay below the clouds. The engine iced up. It quit. The plane glided into the channel and sank. But here's what haunts me. Why did it take 3 days to announce Miller was missing? The official explanation is bureaucratic chaos. The flight wasn't logged. No one knew where he was. But some people believe there was a cover-up, not a sinister conspiracy, just the military trying to avoid embarrassment. They didn't want to admit they'd lost the most famous entertainer in the war on an unauthorized flight in terrible weather. So, they delayed the announcement. They scrambled to figure out what happened, and by the time they went public, the story was already muddled. Let's talk about Glenn Miller himself, because this is more than a mystery. It's a tragedy. Miller didn't have to go to war. He was rich, he was famous, he was too old for the draft. But he enlisted anyway. He believed in the cause. He believed music could help win the war, and he was right. His music gave soldiers hope. It gave them a piece of home. It reminded them what they were fighting for. And then, on a cold December day, he climbed into a tiny plane and flew into the fog. His body was never recovered. No wreckage was ever found. He simply vanished. His wife, Helen, never remarried. She spent the rest of her life waiting for him to come home. So where does that leave us? Somewhere on the floor of the English Channel, in the cold, dark water, sits the wreckage of a Norseman. 3 men are down there: Flight Officer John Morgan, Lieutenant Colonel Norman Bessel, and Major Glenn Miller. The plane is buried in silt. The metal is corroded. The bodies are long gone, but the music remains. In the Mood still plays. Moonlight Serenade still fills dance halls. The soundtrack of World War II lives on. But the man who created it is gone, lost in the fog, lost in the channel, lost to history. December 15th, 1944, the day the music disappeared. August 25th, 1989, Gilgit Airport, northern Pakistan. It's early morning. The sun is just breaking over the peaks of the Karakoram in the Himalayas, some of the highest mountains on Earth. The air is thin here, cold. Even in summer, you can see your breath. Gilgit sits in a valley, ringed by vertical walls of rock and ice. To the south looms Nanga Parbat, 26,060 feet of sheer, deadly mountain, the 9th highest peak in the world. Locals call it Dimer, the mountain of the gods. Climbers call it the Killer Mountain. On the tarmac sits a Fokker F-27 Friendship, registration APBBF. It's a twin turboprop commuter plane, rugged and reliable. This is the lifeline of northern Pakistan, the only practical way to get from the isolated mountain valleys to the capital, Islamabad. On board are 54 people, 5 crew members, 49 passengers, locals, military personnel, families, children. It's a short flight, maybe 45 minutes. The route follows the Indus River Valley south, weaving between mountains that scrape the sky. On a clear day, it's breathtaking. On a bad day, it's a death sentence. Today, the weather is reported as clear. At 7:36 a.m., Pakistan International Airlines Flight 404 takes off, climbing into the morning light. 4 minutes later, it vanishes. No explosion, no distress call, no wreckage. 54 people gone. A 90-foot airplane gone. And to this day, 35 years later, no one has found a single piece of it. Let's set the scene properly, because the terrain is the real story here. The flight path from Gilgit to Islamabad is one of the most dangerous commercial routes in the world. You're not flying over the mountains, you're flying through them. The valleys are narrow, the peaks are vertical, there's no room to turn around. If you encounter bad weather, you can't climb over it. The mountains go higher than most planes can fly. You have to thread the needle, following the river, trusting that the sky ahead stays clear. Nanga Parbat is the monster of this landscape. It rises 23,000 feet from base to summit, one of the tallest vertical reliefs on Earth. The south face is a wall of ice and rock, streaked with avalanche chutes and hanging glaciers. Climbers call it the Rupal Face, and it's considered one of the most difficult and dangerous climbs in mountaineering. If you stray too close, the mountain generates its own weather. Winds accelerate around the peak, creating violent downdrafts. Clouds form instantly, swallowing planes in white blindness. And if you crash into Nanga Parbat, the mountain doesn't let go. Here's what happened. At 7:36 a.m., Flight 404 takes off from Gilgit. The pilot is experienced. The plane is well maintained. The weather is reported as clear. At 7:40 a.m., just 4 minutes after takeoff, the pilot radios in. It's a routine check-in. His voice is calm, professional. All's well, he reports his position. He's climbing south, passing near Nanga Parbat. Everything is normal. And then, silence. The plane doesn't check in again. It doesn't arrive in Islamabad. Air traffic control tries to make contact. No response. By mid-morning, it's clear. Flight 404 is missing. The Pakistani Air Force launches a massive search and rescue operation. Helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, ground teams, they scour the valleys, the glaciers, the ridges. They find nothing. No smoke, no fire, no debris, no bodies. It's as if the plane flew into a door that closed behind it. Now, this is where it gets strange. Let's talk about the logic gaps, because this disappearance defies physics. A Fokker F-27 is not a small plane. It's 77 feet long with a 95-foot wingspan. It weighs 45,000 pounds fully loaded. It has 2 massive turboprop engines, each weighing over a ton. It is a solid object. If it crashes into a mountain, even at high speed, there is wreckage. Metal doesn't vaporize, luggage doesn't disappear, bodies don't dissolve. When planes crash into mountains, they leave scars. They gouge the rock. They shear off trees. They create debris fields that stretch for hundreds of yards. But Flight 404 left nothing. Searchers flew low over Nanga Parbat, scanning the slopes with binoculars. They looked for burn marks, for broken ice, for exposed metal. They saw nothing. How does a 90-foot airplane hit a mountain and leave no trace? Also based on the last radio transmission, investigators believe the plane was somewhere near Nanga Parbat at the time it vanished. The route takes planes close to the south face. If the plane struck the mountain, it likely hit somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000 feet, high up on the slope above the vegetation line in the zone of permanent snow and ice. At that altitude, the environment is hostile. The air is thin. The temperature is well below zero. Avalanches are constant. And here's the terrifying part. If the plane hit a snow-loaded slope, the impact could have triggered a massive avalanche. Imagine it. The plane strikes the mountain at 200 miles per hour. The kinetic energy is immense. The slope fractures. Millions of tons of snow and ice break free and roar down the mountain. The plane doesn't just crash. It's consumed, buried, entombed. Within seconds, the wreckage is under 50 feet of snow. Within minutes, it's under 100 feet. The avalanche grinds the debris, breaks it into smaller pieces, and carries it down the mountain. By the time the avalanche stops, the plane is gone. Invisible. This is the prevailing theory. And it's the only explanation that makes sense. But it raises a horrifying question. If the plane is buried in snow, where is it now? Let's talk about glaciers, because this is where the story gets even stranger. Nanga Parbat is covered in glaciers, massive rivers of ice that flow down the mountain like frozen highways. They move slowly, maybe a few feet per year, but they move. If Flight 404 crashed high on the mountain and was buried by an avalanche, the wreckage is now inside a glacier. It's being carried down the mountain inch by inch, year by year. Glaciers do two things to objects they consume. They preserve them. The cold and pressure create a time capsule. Bodies, equipment, even entire planes can remain intact for decades. They destroy them. The ice grinds against rock, pulverizing everything inside. By the time something emerges at the terminus of the glacier, it's been shredded into unrecognizable fragments. So the question is, which fate met Flight 404? Is the plane still intact, frozen in a pocket of ice, waiting to be calved out of the glacier decades from now? Or has it been ground to confetti, scattered across the mountain in pieces too small to identify? We don't know. And the only way to find out is to wait or search. And searching Nanga Parbat is almost impossible. Let's look at the other theories, because there are whispers of something darker. The shoot-down theory. The flight path from Gilgit to Islamabad skirts the line of control, the heavily militarized border between Pakistan and India in the disputed Kashmir region. Some people believe the plane strayed across the LOC and was shot down by Indian forces, an accidental engagement, a tragic mistake. But this theory has problems. First, if the plane was shot down by a missile or gunfire, there would be a debris field. Wreckage would scatter over a wide area. Searchers would find something. Second, India assisted in the search. If they had shot down a civilian airliner, even accidentally, it would be an international incident. They would have every reason to help cover it up, but they also would have known where the wreckage was. Third, the timing doesn't work. The plane disappeared just 4 minutes after takeoff, still climbing, still over Pakistani territory. A shoot-down is possible, but unlikely. The mechanical failure theory. Could the plane have suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure? An engine fire? A structural collapse? Yes, but even a mid-air breakup leaves debris. Pieces fall over a wide area, engines, wings, bodies. And in a narrow mountain valley, debris would be visible. It would land on slopes, in rivers, on glaciers, but nothing was found. The weather theory. A Canadian researcher named Dr. David Butts was supposed to be on Flight 404. A friend convinced him to drive to Islamabad instead, saving his life. Years later, Butts said that despite the official report of clear weather, the conditions that morning were actually cloudy. There was fog in the valleys. If the pilot flew into a cloud bank and lost visual reference, he could have become disoriented. He might have flown the plane straight into the mountain without realizing it. This fits the evidence. A controlled flight into terrain would be sudden, no time for a distress call, no warning, And if the plane hit a snow slope at a shallow angle, it could have been swallowed by an avalanche immediately. This is the most likely explanation. Here's what haunts me about this case. 54 people are still up there. They're not in a cemetery, they're not in graves. They're somewhere on the slopes of Nanga Parbat, frozen in time. If the plane is intact inside a glacier, they're still in their seats, still wearing their seatbelts, preserved like Egyptian mummies, children who never grew up, families who never made it home, soldiers who survived wars only to die on a routine flight. And they're waiting. Waiting for the glacier to release them, waiting for a climber to stumble across a fragment, waiting for someone to find them. Over the years, there have been searches. Amateur enthusiasts have scoured Google Earth imagery, looking for anomalies on the glaciers. Shadows that might be a fuselage, shapes that might be wings. Nothing has been confirmed. The Pakistani government has no plans to launch another search. The terrain is too dangerous. The cost is too high. Nanga Parbat has claimed over 60 climbers. It's one of the deadliest mountains in the world. Sending teams to search for a plane from 1989 would risk more lives. So Flight 404 remains lost, the highest aviation mystery in history. A plane swallowed by a mountain. So where does that leave us? Somewhere on Nanga Parbat, at 15,000 feet, at 20,000 feet, we don't know, is a Fokker F-27. It's buried in ice, or ground to pieces, or resting on a ledge hidden by snow. 54 people are entombed in the world's most vertical graveyard, and the mountain keeps its secret. Because Nanga Parbat doesn't forgive, it doesn't forget, and it doesn't let go. August 25th, 1989. The day a plane flew into the clouds and became a ghost. The day the mountain swallowed 54 souls and locked them in ice forever.